give a warm Big Island Pond and Derry, New Hampshire welcome to Governor Rick Perry.
Terry, thank you. Robbie, thank you for opening up your house, and thank you for your service. Those of you who, if you walked through the house and you didn't figure it out, he was an Air Force pilot. That's darn good. And we had a good visit. About our tracks never crossed. I'm a bit older, so but we got to work in the same theaters a number of times, and got to work with a lot of really fine men and women. The rest of you that are here, that are veterans, thank you for your service. Today is a good day to start reflecting back on the freedoms that we have in this country, the men and women who helped deliver that freedom to us. We were just talking about those 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, what happened, and the challenges and the struggles that we had as a young nation. And you talk about people that were all in, because they knew they were going to probably lose everything in their lives if they stood up against that crown, if they stood up for what they knew was right for them. And but that's the foundation of this country. That's the shoulders of the giants that we stood upon, and every generation has developed those. My dad served just a little farther east than you. He was in Bitwater. My dad was over at an air station in 1944. As a B-17 tail gunner, 19 years old, flying 35 missions. And so each generation that comes along has served and served nobly, honorably, sacrificially. Sal, you're the latest generation to come along here, former Navy SEAL who was SEAL Team 3. So we are surrounded by extraordinary men and women who understand that freedom's not free. And this weekend we celebrate that. We celebrate the sacrifice, but we also celebrate the freedoms that we have. And I try to remind people on a regular basis how fortunate we are to live in this country. Now, we may not always agree. From time to time, I don't always agree with what's going on in Washington, D.C., whether it's the administration or whether it's the Supreme Court. But at the end of the day, we're America. And we're about the rule of law. And we're about making a country that's better for the next generation. And that's what I base my desire upon. That's what I base my worldview upon, are people who came before us that helped train me, whether it was my father or whether it was instructors in the Air Force, or whether it's been people that I've worked with throughout my government career. And as I lay out a vision for this country, I'm optimistic about the future of this country. And I'm optimistic about the future of this country because I know the people. I know the fabric of this country. And we were just talking that what's going on in the country right now, there's a few people a little pessimistic about what's going on. You know, economically they're a little pessimistic. They look around and see what's going on in the world, and they're a little pessimistic. And I understand that. I told the Hamptons I was a little bit reminiscent of 1979. I kind of feel like it's 1979 again. You know, you think about, I'd been out of the Air Force about a year and a half. I watched Jimmy Carter hollow out the military. Those of you that remember that period of time, he was doing exactly like we're seeing today. Our military being hollowed out. I mean, that is an incredible impact that we're seeing across this country today, is our military being hollowed out the way that it is. You know, we talked about doing away with the A-10. I mean, some specifics here, but the equipment that we see that we're not having access to. And I saw it in '79. We saw I happened to left the Air Force and went back to my home, Paint Creek, and moved in with my mom and dad, and I went to farming. And we were, wheat was one of the things that we raised, and our grains were embargoed from being sold to the Soviet Union. We saw our food supply being used against us, actually, We saw our Olympic athletes boycotted from going to the 1980 Olympics. I mean, kids who had spent their whole lives preparing to represent America. And that president said, no, we'll show those Russians. Well, I think there was better ways to show the Russians than not sending our kids to compete, but that's a whole other story in itself. We saw our embassy overrun in Iraq and the debacle that created. So there's some parallels between now and 1979. The country was pessimistic. We had a job participation rate about 62.5%, about the same as it is right now. That low job participation rate. So there's these parallels.
It takes a harder to get up and hurry.
The good side of this is, you think of what happened in a short 10-year period of time. We saw the Berlin Wall fall. We saw Soviet communism defeated because we had a president of the United States that came in that believed in America, believed in Americans, believed in the economy of this country. He believed that when America's strong, the world is safer. And that's exactly what we can do. We can do this again. I've got complete faith in the American people. I laid out a plan yesterday where I talked about the economics and how to get this country back on its feet, how to get people back working again. And I got more than just a little bit of rhetoric about it. I got a record about it. As the governor of the 12th largest economy in the world, from the end of 2007 through 2014. Now, remind people, that was as bad an economic time as this country's been through since the Great Depression. You think about 08, 09, and 10, what we saw happen in this country. And Terry shared with you, during that period of time, 1.5 million jobs were created in one state, my home state. And the rest of the country lost 400,000 jobs. It didn't happen by accident either. It happened because we put those policies into place. We were just talking about your budget today and the challenges that you all have here in New Hampshire.
Oh, yeah.
We knew that we had to cut spending. And you see, that's the same thing we got to do in Washington, D.C. Anybody that gets up and says, there are two things that have to occur. You have to cut spending, and then you have to create policies that create growth. When you do those two things, we'll address this economy that we are facing in this country. We'll face the immoral debt that these young people are faced with as well. But that's the power of what you can do. You put tax policy into place that doesn't spend all the money. You put a regulatory climate in that is fair and predictable, a legal system that doesn't allow oversuing, and accountable public school policy so that you have a skilled workforce. If you're going to lure people to New Hampshire, you're going to have tax policy, regulatory policy, legal policies, and that are inviting, and a skilled workforce. I want to share with you three things very quickly that we did in Texas that people frankly don't know about, but they really need to give some thought about, that can occur all across this country. It didn't happen just because it was Texas. It happened because we had courageous men and women that put these policies into place. And if we'll free up the states, I'm a big believer in the 10th Amendment that says that the federal government's supposed to do a few things and do those few things really well. Things like stand a strong military.
Yeah.
Things like securing our border.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about the federal government get those two things right? 2003, Texas was 27th in the nation in high school graduation rates. We're about in the middle of the pack. We've got between 4 and 5 million kids during that decade. We became a majority minority populated public school system during that period of time. This is a relatively difficult population of kids to educate because of the economic conditions that they found themselves in, the ethnicity, the cultural, the geographic. I mean, there were a lot of challenges in Texas because it's such a diverse population. We put the largest incentive pay program for teachers in America in place. We started testing our children so that we could come in and identify when they were having problems early on. And we put accountable public school policies in place. And here were the results. 10 years later, Texas had the second highest overall high school graduation rates in America. If you were Hispanic or African Americans, you had the #1 high school graduation rates in the country. There's no bigger, more powerful story to go have with people than to say, we're going to graduate your kids from high school. A young person who graduates from high school will make 50% more money than one that doesn't. It's a powerful economic impact, and we did that in that state. You want to know why African Americans left blue states and moved to Texas back during that decade? It's because they knew that they could come there and their children would have a better chance, and they would have a better chance in life. That's one of the great concepts that the next president needs to understand, that all wisdom doesn't emanate out of Washington, D.C. It's the reason I'm not for Common Core, that you can't put making the decisions about how to deliver health care, how to educate your children, how to build transportation infrastructure. I trust you and your lawmakers to make those decisions in the people of the state rather than Washington, D.C. We know that we can have a better future if we'll allow these states to compete, to have. Louis Brandeis was a liberal Supreme Court justice, but he believed in the Constitution. And he said that the states were the laboratories of democracy. The states were going to compete against each other. They were going to come up with novel ideas. They were going to experiment with concepts. He said from time to time a state will foul it up. He said they're imperfect. But he said at least they haven't destroyed this republic. And that was such a wise man, in my opinion. And he understood that states are going to go make mistakes from time to time. I think about Colorado. I defend Colorado's right to be wrong, though. I mean, that's if you're truly going to be a constitutionalist, and you're going to look at that Bill of Rights and you're going to say, you know what, those states will figure it out. The other thing that we did in our state that I want to share with you that people don't really know, but it's a reflection, and this is, Republicans don't get a lot of credit for the issue of the environment. We added 5.6 million people to Texas population from 2001 through 2012. 5.6 million. How many people live in New Hampshire? 1.3. So 3 New Hampshires, right? Okay, we added that to the population. Now that's a lot of people. That's a lot of pickup trucks. That's what that is. And it's also what? A lot of exhaust. Non-point source pollution. You think about how much emissions come from 5.6 million people and all the cars and trucks that they would be driving. And another thing to keep in mind, Texas has the largest refining capacity in the country. We got all of those refineries along the Gulf Coast that are making the unleaded gasoline that you're using. They're making the chemicals that you use. What does that have? Emissions, right? Emissions going up in the air. Oh, and by the way, our weather's not like this. Our weather, because of where we are latitude-wise, is very conducive to the production of ozone. So I just told you 3 things that the conventional wisdom might tell you the environment in Texas is worse because they've grown so much and they've got all of that stuff going on. Here's the truth. Here's the facts. Since I was governor, nitrogen oxide levels went down by 62.5%. Ozone production went down by 23%. And no matter where you are on the issue of climate change, we reduced the CO2 levels by 9%. Wasn't that the point? My point is that Republican leadership was able to put into place policies, and we did it by giving incentives to companies and to private sector entities and to our power plant manufacturers, the folks who develop our energy, and they switched from older, dirty burning plants to cleaner burning plants. In the case of the electric plants, they moved from older, dirty burning plants to cleaner natural gas burning plants. I mean, we gave them incentives.
And they responded to it the same way that people respond to tax policy and regulatory policy and legal policies. That's the kind of leadership we need in this country. People that trust Americans and trust the states to come up with the ideas. I will suggest to you that we've gotten away from that so much in this country. And the next president of the United States, I hope, gets up every day and goes to the White House and does a number of things. Number one, I hope we have a president of the United States that goes to the White House, that goes to the Oval Office every day and calls his chief of staff, calls the secretary of the Veterans Affairs Committee, and says, "Are you taking care of our veterans?" It is an absolute debacle to see what's happened to the young men and women who held their hand up and said, "Here am I, send me." And we made them promises. We promised that we would take care of them if they would sacrifice for us, and we have not done that. And we need a president that will honor that commitment to our veterans in this country. And we need a president that gets up every day and realizes that all wisdom doesn't emanate out of Washington, D.C., that works to go find the places that the Democrats and the Republicans, there's a lot of issues. We all want better jobs. We want safer communities. We know those are things that doesn't make any difference what the initial behind your name is, but issues that we really care about. And bring this country together. Find the things that can really inspire us to do things together, because we've got a commitment to the next generation. I took my father back to his old base, and it was the most powerful trip I've ever been on. We walked through his old barracks, through his combat mess. We walked down this partial runway where he had taken off 35 times with a bomb-laden B-17 to go do his duty to stop fascism, to free a continent. And we went across the English Channel. Interestingly, when we went across the English Channel, we were on a little small plane, and he looked over at me and went, 71. I said, "What do you mean 71, Dad?" He said, "It's my 71st trip across the English Channel." 35 times. And we went to the American Cemetery above Omaha Beach. And it is an incredibly powerful place. Over 9,000 graves, 9,000 white crosses and stars a day. Interestingly, every one of those look west. They are facing west. West across the Atlantic Ocean. West across to America. The America that these young heroes sacrificed. The America they would never go home to. And it struck me as we were standing there that they are lying there in silent judgment of us. And I think the question we need to ask, have we earned their respect? Was their sacrifice worth it? And that is the challenge I think that we have as Americans today as we get ready to celebrate our independence. Have we earned the sacrifice of all those who come before us? And I know what the answer to that is. That the greatest days in this country are ahead of us, because we're only a few good decisions and leadership changes from having America. God bless you.
Crop TV.